This episode was made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to episode 157 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, with the help of special guest Remy Nakamura, we discuss the second half of Misha Green's 2020 series, Lovecraft Country. Our guest this week is Remy Nakamura. Remy is a writer of weird, dark, and Lovecraftian fiction. You can find his stories in Escape Pod, Pseudopod, and a variety of anthologies. Welcome back, Remy.
Hey guys, it's good to be here.
It's good to have you back, man. We're here for this show. We are finishing out our month of Lovecraft Country, and the month of October definitely feels appropriate for the season. I'm having a lot of fun with this one. How about you guys?
Oh, this is a blast, yeah.
I'm just having the most fun with this story and this show, watching the end of the show. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like it kind of kicked into a different gear in the second half, and I'll be excited to hear what you have to say about it.
Absolutely, man. The heavy, I mean, it's weird to say that you're having fun with it, right? When there's so many like super heavy topics and history lessons going on. But yeah, we'll get into each of those. Before we do get into that, I just wanted to mention, I voted this week and it felt fucking amazing. I loved it. It was so good. I voted for Joe Biden, and it felt like one of the like first really actionable things I could do in the last 4 years. And anyway, I highly recommend it to our listeners if you haven't done it yet. It feels great.
It's a unique high. You know, yeah. if you're chasing that unique high, vote and see where that gets you.
I read a post online somewhere where a lot of Oregonians, I think, got their ballots on Thursday or Friday, and that night he walked his ballot to the drop box. Local Dropbox, and as he walked there, he said it was like a movie, like all these people kind of converging on the ballot place, all very determined, grim looks on their faces.
A rising score.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit, but when I was raised, it was like, don't talk about religion and don't talk about politics when you're around people. It was sort of a taboo subject, and I think this came from my mother being sort of, she was a Democrat, and most of my family is not. And so I think she learned from experience, like, it's better to just not talk about it because it's going to be an argument, so let's just leave it alone. She knew that she was going to have to argue with people if she talked about it. But also over time, I've learned that not talking about politics and leaving everything sort of unsaid, it benefits the status quo. It means that everyone can just be comfortable with their beliefs and never have them challenged, and so it's going to benefit certain viewpoints. And if anything, this show has sort of reinforced that belief that like we all need to be a little bit more outspoken, and that's a reason why we chose to talk about it a little bit on the podcast. Whereas old Luke would have probably been like, oh no, we shouldn't talk about that just in case it, you know what I mean, like upsets the balance. And what if we turn off certain listeners? And it's like, no, it's more important to, I think, take a stand. And be principled on some things. So anyway, that's why I wanted to talk about it, and hopefully our listeners appreciate that.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that, and I think there's a growing awareness that silence itself, the decision to not talk about politics is political, right? And like you said, it supports the status quo.
Well, let's get into the show. It is such a odd mix. I don't know if you listened to our coverage of the start of the show, but I mentioned how it continues to be like sort of more over the top and campy at times than I ever imagined it would be. And that does hold true through the rest of it. But the more like super dramatic, serious stuff also elevates to another level in this second half. And it's such an odd blend, but like I found myself really, really enjoying it. It is unlike anything else I think I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you, Remy, specifically, like since you weren't here for the first 5 episodes of our coverage, do you want to sort of just give your general thoughts on that first half, and then maybe lead into your thoughts of the show overall?
Sure. Yeah. The whole series has been an homage to genre, and to maybe to pulp specifically. And I feel like one thing that Misha Green is trying to do very ambitiously is try to fill this void of blackness, right? That from all of the pulps that Atticus and his family grew up on and loved, and many Black viewers and readers also loved, but didn't see themselves in it, right? And so, like that Indiana Jones-ish scene that I think you both mentioned from the last episode, isn't that now we have you can imagine Black adventurers in that space, right, where maybe there's been a real dearth of that in the past. And so I feel like there have been all these different sorts of, you've got this Asian horror, right? You've got the Chucky type horror. You've got Indiana Jones style tomb raiding type adventuring. You have all these different sorts of more ghost haunted mansion, haunted house type of horror. I feel like they're trying to fit in as many different things as possible in this and make up for a lot of lost time, a lot of lost decades of storytelling.
Yeah, I read Misha Green talk about basically an interviewer had asked, did you feel like you were cramming everything in? And she basically kind of said, no, I didn't feel like we were cramming anything. It just felt like all of the things that we wanted to do, we were getting to do. And so like getting to take advantage of that, I think the show does that very well. And for me, for like sort of just quick general thoughts, a word that I wrote in my notes many, many times was profound. And I kept feeling like I don't think the show is entirely perfect, but I do think that when it gets to those moments where it touches me in my soul and my heart, like those profound moments, like sort of transcend anything that I don't know, anything that's really on TV right now, anything that's really going on in films. Like it's up in that upper echelon, and it's really interesting because of the campy nature of the rest of it. There are moments that deal with things that are some of the most serious, like racial injustices in history, and then the next moment there's a giant Shoggoth or whatever they're called. It's this really, like you said, Luke, it's a really interesting blend. But I find myself walking away really, it's thought provoking, and I think that was what the intention of the show was. But at the same time, it is like there's a lot of time for Black people to explore the space that they haven't been able to, like you were saying, Remy. So yeah, I think just overall, it's a show that's going to stick with me.
And I would add the sci-fi elements are really strong in this too, right? With this sort of time travel, space-time stuff that Hippolyta gets into. The show is on a meta level working as a conversation with genre and with what the established status quo is of what the characters look like who are involved in these sorts of adventures. And I do think some awareness of that going into the show will help, because it is so directly in the text of what is happening on screen. I really don't think that this is sort of like, I don't think it's just a meta discussion. I think it is important for sort of following what is happening on screen, because I could see like maybe if you come into this completely ignorant of what the sort of history of Black people in genre fiction has been, you maybe don't appreciate exactly what is trying to be achieved on screen. I wonder how much of it there's like a literacy thing of like being aware of where that's at, that will help you to enjoy the show fully, I guess. I don't know. Do you think that's true?
I think that a part of this show that's going to turn people off is that they were swinging for the fences to the max. Like they were going for everything they wanted to try to do. They went for it 100%. And I think that there's going to be some people who look at it and say like, this is way over the top. I can't. And then there's probably also going to be people who are going to see things like Emmitt Till or Tulsa and say like, how are they going to take that and narratively, create fiction around it and like be like offended by that. But I don't know. I think that I think there's a lot of reasons where people could like sort of push back against it. But I think if you like you said, if you have some knowledge of the atrocities that have happened in America, and you also are, open-minded going into this show, I don't see how it doesn't, sink its teeth into you, because you're going to get invested in the characters emotionally. I think a lot of them have great journeys, and then like I've said throughout this whole thing, the sort of Lovecraftian elements are the icing on the cake for genre fans. It's like that's the stuff that people are coming for because it's called Lovecraft Country. And then you stay for the fact that like the allegories there of, everyday racism is a horror unto itself and all of that. So I agree. I do think that there will be some people who don't necessarily, it's not going to be for everybody. And I think there will be some people who push back against it, but I would recommend that people give it a shot for sure. Another thing about the show that I think is amazing is just, I think it's unflinchingly diverse and inclusive in the stories that it's telling. But if you guys are ready, I want to move into episode by episode discussion.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Okay, so episode 6 is potentially my favorite episode of the show. I just want to start by saying that, but it's called Meet Me in Daegu. In 1949, South Korea, Jia studies to be a nurse and lives with her mother, who demands she pick up men to have sex with. Jia brings home a man and kills him with her tentacle-like 9 tails that project out of her body. It is revealed that Jia is possessed by Kumiho, the 9-tailed fox spirit, and she must kill 100 men to be human again. Her stepfather was molesting her, and her mother had a shaman send the Kumiho to possess her daughter to kill him. In 1950, the Korean War begins, and Jia works as a nurse. To smoke out a communist spy, the Americans arrest the nurses, and Atticus executes one of the nurses. Jia's friend, Youngjia, reveals herself to be the spy. Jia decides to seduce Atticus with the intention of killing him, but falls in love with him instead. Jia believes she can control her tails, but while having sex with Atticus, her tails emerge and attack him. She has a vision of his future and tells him he will die if he returns to America. Atticus ends the relationship. Jia and her mother consult the shaman, who tells them that many more will die. I did not expect the show to go in this direction. I was blown away. I could not believe this is a movie unto itself. It's kind of its own thing. And again, I found this to be really profound. And I thought that the way that we were able to see the Korean War with this idea of a cursed spirit, which is sort of in that Lovecraftian fantasy, realm, all with tons of subtitles and actual, the actual language that's being spoken in Korea. I don't know. I felt like it was such a change from what we were seeing with Jim Crow America, and it was a welcome change.
This is definitely one of my favorite episodes as well. And my background, I grew up partly in Japan. My mom is native Japanese, and so a lot of the storytelling elements that suffuse East Asia, like the 9-tailed fox, and I'm trying to avoid saying tentacle porn, but I'm going to say it. Tentacle porn. It is a thing that exists.
Yeah, I think you can't quite help but think of that if you're aware of its existence.
And that was one thing that was actually kind of powerful, because I think in the history of tentacle porn, which I'm going to go down that path just a little bit.
Tell us about the history of tentacle porn, Remy.
I think it was largely developed because you couldn't show a male phallus on screen, but there was still this desire to show, I guess, sexual violence against women, basically. And so I think that's how that's the whole history behind that. So here you have this woman, an Asian woman, and especially with a Korean background, where there's the history of Korean comfort women who were like basically sex slaves for Japanese soldiers. So you have, I feel like, a reversal of all of that. Like here is a woman who has this power, right, and who has the ability to sexually. I'm definitely not. I don't want to say that I support depictions of rape in any sense, but I feel like this is a really important, like a subversion of those tropes that have dominated Asian anime in a lot of storytelling for a long time. So I was really excited when I realized, I think a little bit before they described it, I was like, oh, I'll bet there's some connection between her and the whole Legends of Nine-Tail fox spirits, and then this whole subversion of the tentacle porn tropes. All of that was pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, I didn't even pick up on the history of the tentacle porn stuff, and I mean that's a good point though. This show's about like reclaiming things, and I think like a reclaiming of that for women as a subversion to what the norm was is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on the exact thing they were going for there, Remy. I didn't know maybe all the specifics, but it did feel like that was being engaged with directly. I mean, that moment is a standout moment from the entire series, and just shock. Like, you knew something was going to happen, but man, that very first man she brings back, and they've done so much to sell you on this character. And you think she's like being really shy, and like that's just how she is as a person, but then you like learn it's because she's like trying to figure out how to be a human being. And then man, yeah, when the tentacles or the tails, I guess they are, first come out, and then we get that when they back away, and I thought when you could see the silhouette, it was really powerful. And then wow, what a moment. In general, I agree with you guys. This was an amazing episode. Probably, it's definitely in my top 3 of the series. And it felt like it could be its own show. Like I would have watched a show about just Gia and Atticus in Korea. Like that would have been enough for me. It was so good, so well done.
Yeah.
And they really went for it with everything, really. And the darkness of the war and what it did to Atticus was such an important piece of his character. And something that I'll just go ahead and say, we read the book. This is all absent in the book. It was all added, and I really wanted to compliment Misha Green on this because I think it added layers to Atticus as a character, and was some of the best stuff in the series, which was wholly invented for the series. So whenever you see something like that, you know that the creator has really taken it and decided to put their own spin on it and their own touch to it, and it worked really well.
I have to talk about the fact that Gia is like fascinated by American films specifically, and the way that she's kind of like, we know she's a spirit, and watching films to sort of like understand humans and then realize empathy through film. And I think like you have to think of a filmmaker. Anytime they're talking about film, there's something being said there, and I think it's that this idea of empathy being found through shows or movies or things like that. And that's exactly what this show is trying to do, is find the empathy in people so they can empathize with maybe somebody who's different than them. And then I just love the fact that she loves like Judy Garland, and I love that they like, she and Atticus have like a bond over the films, and the moment when he like is able to get the reel from George so they can watch the film together on the base and everything. I don't know. I was really taken with all that stuff.
Did you catch the voiceover at the end that's Julie Garland?
Yeah.
That led me down a rabbit hole after watching that episode of just learning about how Julie Garland's career went. And it made me kind of rethink the entire episode too. Just there are so many different ways to look at this one episode, right? And so one of the ways would be to just look at it as kind of a I don't know, like a homage to Hollywood of the time, right? And to and maybe some specific homage to Julie Garland, and then she's talking about how I think something about how people are trying to dehumanize her, right? I can't remember what the specific quote was.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, her history is she was taken advantage of in Hollywood, the ways that, and like, it's very well known, like it basically dealt with abuse throughout her career. And she was like the it person at the time, like everybody wanted to be her, everybody loved her. And so, yeah, it was really, like I said, I keep feeling like the word profound is coming to me. It's really profound to hear an older Judy Garland sort of look back at her career. And then you put that on top of this episode. And like you said, you can draw all kinds of meaning. I love that. Wow, you guys really dove into it more than I did. I remember, actually, I wrote that down. I was like, oh, look up who did that quote. And then I didn't do it. So I'm glad you brought that. That's news to me. But yeah, this episode also really deals with the Count of Monte Cristo in a way that I was really excited about.
And then I love the line that Atticus hit Gia with when she smugly sort of tells him the ending, and then he says, "Well, that's how that was a really useful way to end the movie, but that's not how the book ends." And I just thought like, "Ooh, ink to film," like this is the kind of shit we get to talk about. We should cover Count of Monte Cristo, by the way, at some point. That would be fun.
Yeah,
I wanted to call out one thing that. I don't know if it troubled me. It definitely troubles me. It's Atticus's murder of Gia's friend. And there are a couple other points that kind of align with that through the series. We see that with Montrose, right, in his murder of Yahima. I mean, these are innocent people. These aren't people who have persecuted. They're not killing in self-defense. They're not killing in revenge. These deeply, deeply morally complicate Montrose and Atticus.
Yeah, and I was gonna bring that up because I think especially Montrose's murder is not handled particularly well. It feels like it really doesn't hold a lot of weight for him going forward. It's not something that we really circle back on very much. It's kind of just forgotten about. Yeah, so I think that one really bothered me. But I can see it here with Atticus too. He does pay a price somewhat for this with Gia, but it seems like she forgives him for it, and then we kind of move on. But I agree. It almost felt like maybe that was a little too easy. Like it was a really heinous thing that he did there. I guess it was, to me, I lumped it more into like the horrors of war and the thing that people get into. But this did feel particularly egregious. I don't know. It definitely troubled me. I agree with you.
I actually paused it to just to see, like, did Atticus do that or did the other guy do that? Like, I was so in disbelief that Atticus would do that.
And I'm sort of with Luke, because I felt the same way. Like, I think this was a moment of saying, like, the horrors of war, the things young men are made to do and expected to do. And then have to come back with that, and especially being a black man who's coming back to a country that hates him, and having done those kinds of things and complicating. I think complicating a character and creating gray there, I think, is good for depth as well. But it was pretty horrific. Like it was definitely one of the worst things you can ever do. I have two things that I wanted to mention because we've now spoken about two things that Misha Green has talked about. So the first one, since we're talking about Yahima a little bit, a Deadline reporter asked her a question recently, because she's active on Twitter. Misha Green's very active on Twitter, and she's addressed some stuff. So the Deadline reporter said, unlike the position many creators take, you engaged directly with your audience over criticism, most recently over your admittance on Twitter that you feel you failed in the telling of Yahima's tale in the 4th episode, A History of Violence, in attempting to show the uncomfortable truth that oppressed folks can also be oppressors. Why did you decide to go that way? Misha Green has said, as a person and a storyteller, I'm interested in growing, and part of that journey is accountability. Acknowledging my failure in the handling of Yahima's storyline is the first step in holding myself accountable. Now, I also wanted to read the tweet that she sent someone, because someone said, if you're at Misha Green, if you're still answering questions, I would still love to hear an explanation from you on why y'all chose to portray Yahima the way y'all did. And she responded, I wanted to show the uncomfortable truth that oppressed folks can also be oppressors, but I didn't examine or unpack the moment / portrayal of Yahima as thoroughly as I should have. It's a story point worth making, but I failed in the way I chose to make it. So yeah, I wanted to get your guys' take on that, because I think ultimately the character wasn't on screen. It didn't have enough to do. There wasn't enough impact there necessarily. And I think Misha realizing that is huge.
Can I say, as I am queer, and if any moment almost lost me as a viewer, it was Yahima's killing. Partly because it is such a trope. And here they introduced this two-spirit character, and then a two-spirit native, like a tribal character, and then just killed them off without any cost to Montrose or to the other characters. And so I remember actually ranting a little bit about it to my partner. and saying, I need to see if Montrose pays for this. Like, what is the cost to Montrose? And actually, I think what saved the series, besides its amazingness in every other way, for me, was Misha's apology, an acknowledgement as a creator that she screwed up on that she in her handling of, because it's lazy, right, as a creator to just bring somebody in for somebody else's I don't know, for plot development or character development, and then to just let them go. And then when you do it with someone who is so marginalized, with a group of people who are so marginalized, and you reinforce stereotypes and tropes, it's even more egregious. And so I'm really glad that apology of Misha's and acknowledgement carried a tremendous amount of weight for me, and I can't imagine for other transgender viewers or other members of the LGBT community. I think that meant a lot.
It's almost ironic that you have a creator who is trying through the storyline to show marginalized people oppressing other marginalized people, but then falls into the same trap that we've seen so many white creators fall into, right? Of creating a character fully to service another character and not fully realizing them and giving them their own agency in the story. And I do love that she came out and apologized for that. I think it shows a nice example for creators to realize that so many of us are going to make mistakes, even with the best of intentions, and it's better to just own them. And you know, you have to accept the criticism. You know what I mean? Like, you're probably going to feel defensive because you're going to know the things you meant to do. But you have to, it's something that you're going to have to learn to live with and learn to grow through. And the fact that Misha Green is doing that, I want to give her props for it, because it's difficult to do, right? Like, we all have egos and we all don't want to admit when we're wrong. And the fact that she's doing that, props to her.
Yeah, lots of respect for her for that.
So another thing I wanted to talk about was we were talking about the spoken word voiceover, sort of poetry / just like other clips of people speaking throughout history. And again, someone asks her sort of like, what, how did you go about doing that? And like, what was the inspiration for that? And Misha Green mentioned, it was Beyonce's Lemonade and I Am Not Your Negro at the same time. She said basically like she saw people doing this and was like, this is a quote, "Ooh, this is exciting. That feels fresh. I wonder if we can do that on Lovecraft Country." It also came from a desire to make this feel like a piece out of time. Yes, it's set in the past, but it's also very much here in our present, and it will be here in our future. How do we take these found footage audio pieces and place it there so you understand that this is our history, this is us now, and it can be us in the future if we don't pay attention to it? And another moment of sort of the profound coming back for me, those audio clips in these episodes, a lot of times, like the implication that the episode already has on its own, but then you add in actual historical elements or sort of poetry by a Black artist, or you add in like these iconic moments from people like Judy Garland talking about her past and her history with Hollywood. This is to me just like speaks to, like Luke was saying, the meta level of all of this within our world.
To me, that's the sign that what I was saying is true, and that this show wants you to engage beyond its bounds and to look at the historical context and think about our modern lives and how this all intersects. And I think including these kind of quotes, when you might look at it and go like, oh, this is odd to take this and put it over this scene, and like, yeah, modern music, stuff like that. But I think it all achieves that effect that she was going for, and that it does make the series feel modern while being a sort of history piece. I think it works. It is a little unusual, but it feels fresh in that way, like she said.
Yeah, and added weight, adding like, and I think that's another thing, like ancestry is huge in this story as well, and the idea of like the past suffering of ancestors and what that represents to people today and everything, and getting to hear people who are no longer alive and speak on a show that's currently going. It's
James Baldwin.
Extremely profound, yeah, to me. Episode 7 is called I Am. Hippolyta visits the ruins of the Ardham Lodge and discovers that George was there. She works out how to use the orrery and finds a key hidden within. Christina shows Ruby the corpses of William, who was killed by Lancaster, and Dell, and asks for her help. Letty and Atticus discover that they are both having dreams of Hannah, Atticus's slave ancestor, and deduce that she escaped with the Book of Names. Atticus discovers his father's homosexuality, while Letty finds she is pregnant. Atticus goes to St. Louis to contact a relative and is told the Book of Names was lost in the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. Hippolyta goes to the Winthrop Observatory and uses the key. Letty finds the orrery and tells Atticus where Hippolyta has gone. Atticus saves Hippolyta from 2 of Lancaster's policemen, but in the struggle, a portal to another dimension is open, which Atticus and Hippolyta both fall through. Hippolyta discovers she has the power to be whoever she wants, befriending Josephine Baker in 1920s Paris, becoming a Dahomey Amazon who defeats a group of Confederate soldiers and meets George again, finally embracing his true identity as a discoverer. Atticus returns from the other dimension. So, this episode, I think, goes places that almost no show has gone before. You know, it really opens up a can of worms, and we're able to see multiple different parallel universes. We see all kinds of cosmic stuff. What did you guys think of this episode?
This episode is, to me, one of the most visually stunning and directly engaging with sci-fi, right, episodes. And I was really taken with how this is a kind of character in Hippolyta that does not ever get to do this sort of thing. It is a I hope I'm being accurate when I say middle-aged black woman going on a multiverse spanning adventure and being the star and getting to, learn how to fight and getting to learn to be confident and living all these lives. And it's just something that, like, you take that story and you put a white man in it and you're like, yeah, I've seen that many a time. But
Right.
For her to do it felt really special. And once again, on a meta level, felt like this is important to see this happen. And I was really taken with it. And it was almost like Doctor Strange levels of bizarre sort of space flying over the top stuff, right? But it all works in that way. And I was really happy to see that something that was so huge in the book even sort of get bigger in the show and go farther. Yeah. And it really does go to a lot of weird places, but I was along for the ride and very happy for this one. Unlike maybe the episode we talked about before, I want to say it was episode 4, the sort of Indiana Jones adventure, where it felt like they tried to go so big with it that they lost me a little bit. This one really hit home, so I liked it.
I feel like so much of this is, I don't know, when we read pulps especially, we want to see ourselves in that story, right? We want to be the hero. We want to, we're living vicariously through, maybe it's John Carter, and going to this fantastic Mars and being the hero. And I feel like, I would say that most of the history of science fiction, especially maybe in the mid-third of the 20th century, which is where these characters, where Lovecraft Country is largely set. Pulps are wish fulfillment fantasies for white middle class men. Maybe take the middle class out of there, I don't know. But it's largely it centers white men. It's their adventures. They're straight white men, right? Because they're hanging out with, they're rescuing, curvy princesses who are scantily clad, and this is what you see on all of these iconic pulp magazine covers. But here you have, like you described, Hippolyta, a mother, a black woman who's sacrificed so much for her family, and who's living in this Jim Crow era America that limits her as a black person, that limits her as a woman. And here she gets to hang out and live this artistic life with Josephine Baker. She gets to just slay a bunch of Confederate soldiers in the most badass way you can imagine. And then she gets to go to every possible conceivable world imaginable. And she gets an apology from her husband. And so I just feel like in so many ways, right, this is wish fulfillment for Hippolyta and anybody who can empathize with her, who can relate to her. And in all of the imagery, especially towards the end, where they see they're coming out of the spacecraft and they're wearing their outfits, and everything about that is it evokes those pulps.
I loved the connection to the comic. You know, she became I can't think of the name of the
Orithia.
Yeah.
Orithia Blue.
Yeah, Orithia Blue. So I loved that, like, she becomes this character that her daughter sees her as already, and like that. And like you said, Remy, the part that, you know, this is such an expansive story, and it's so fun to go along on this journey. But the part that really hit me was the conversation she has with George. You know, as a straight white man, I can't, you know, I'm not putting myself in the shoes of a, you know, Jim Crow era black woman very often, and the opportunity to do that in this show, and to understand how, you know, how someone like that could be feeling, you know, trapped in a world, in a relationship she's been forced into almost seemingly, and you know, just the way that George is apologizing for holding her back from all of the things she could have been. I just you know, it's not something I think about very often. And I appreciate the show for, you know, taking me to that place.
It's showing what you were talking about, Remy, and Misha Green even said, like, showing the way that oppressed people can oppress, right? And I think we're seeing here, it's very important that it's a man who is, you know, himself marginalized, yet he's tied into that society of sort of the patriarchy, right? And he is complicit in sort of holding back his wife from, like you said, the things that she might have been able to achieve. And yeah, to hear him apologize and admit the role he played in that, because he wanted the comfort of having a wife at home for him, like a place of safety when he's going out on his adventures for the book that he's writing. I love the way those all intersect, and it was bold, you know, and it underlines what she was trying to do in showing characters who, you know, interact with oppression in many different ways, and how, you know, it's not like all the black characters in this show are beyond reproach themselves, you know, never oppress anyone. That is definitely not the case. And I wanted to bring that back to something else that happens at the start of this episode, which is easy to lose in sort of the multiverse spanning story we get, is we see Atticus for the first time be confronted with Montrose's sexuality. And I thought was a really just brutal scene of him dropping, you know, the F slur at his father, and then having like a meltdown over it. And you know, Montrose is a complicated character who's done things that I think he is sort of, we talked about, you know, maybe he doesn't pay the price for it that he should have. But here I felt so bad for him. And shout out to Jonathan Majors, because he does this like hyperventilating thing. I don't know if you've noticed this, where he like clutches his stomach and he like breathes really heavy and stuff. And like, it's so affecting. Like, I felt myself like reacting every time I saw him do it to whatever situation he was in. So, you know, props to him for doing it. It really works. And he does it here. Like, you know, he runs down the stairs and he's like doing this breathing thing that really got me. I don't know. I'm really curious to actually know your thoughts on this whole scene, Remy.
You know, it's, I don't know if I have strong reaction to this specific scene, because now kind of Montrose's his suppressed suppressed expression, his relationship with his father, his relationship with Atticus, and then his kind of coming out over the next couple of episodes are all kind of blended in. So I think I might speak to that more as we talk about the next few episodes.
Cool. Yeah, let's circle back to it then. So going back to Hippolyta though, what an exciting thing to see on screen. And her character becomes one of the most powerful ones in the group going forward, who literally is able to take what she's learned in this episode and come back and save the day later. So, yeah.
I love this. She is able to name herself different things, right? And that's how she becomes these different versions of Hippolyta by naming herself. A couple of thoughts on that. One is that for those of us who grow up with a lot of privilege, with every possible privilege, there's this sense that you can name yourself to be whatever you want to be, right? And I think that's I don't know if we want to call it a myth that's taught to Americans in general, but if you experience any kind of oppression, either through your poverty or race or gender or gender expression or you cannot name yourself to be anything. That's because society will not enable you to become those things. And so Hippolyta has this freedom when she steps out of our world, right, to name herself, to become whatever she wants to be. And to bring this back to a later episode, she then says to Dee later on that she chooses to name herself Mother and to come back to Dee. And so I felt that was pretty powerful to foreshadow a few episodes.
I mean, a character who felt that she didn't accomplish everything she could in life and then is able to, and then chooses to go back for her daughter. Like that sort of familial love. It's like a bond that's, goes beyond anything. And it shows like ultimately, given the decision, she chose to be with her family versus endless possibilities, which very profound. I'm going to keep saying it.
It's a good word.
I had one other thing, just this idea of this like godlike alien figure in this episode who rules the multiverse seemingly, or at least teaches Hippolyta the ways. I just thought that was badass. Like her introduction, her awesome hair,
Yeah.
the way that Hippolyta is like battling her way out of the spaceship and like figuring out. I just, all of it just was like very fun, timey-wimey kind of stuff,
It's like an Afrofuturistic Doctor Who,
Right, exactly.
Perfect.
So episode 8 is a reference to a racially insensitive word that I don't feel comfortable saying. If you're interested in the title of the episode, you can look it up. I just personally don't want to say it, but I will tell you about the episode. Atticus, Letty, Ruby, Montrose, and Diana attend the memorial for Emmitt Till, who was a friend of Diana's. Diana is stopped by Lancaster, who demands she give him the orrery. And when she refuses, he casts a spell that leads to two malevolent spirits, Topsy and Bopsy, to haunt her. Atticus gives Christina the key to the orrery/time machine in exchange for learning how to cast spells. Christina is planning to sacrifice Atticus at the fall equinox to be immortal. Ruby grows closer to Christina but is hurt when she tells her that she does not care about Till's lynching. Gia arrives in Chicago, causing Letty to become angry with Atticus. Montrose and Atticus reconcile. Atticus says he visited the future while at the Winthrop Observatory and will have a son by Letty named George, who will write the book Lovecraft Country. Letty trades the negative of her photos in exchange for Christina casting a spell. Montrose and Atticus cast a spell to protect them, but nothing happens. Two men kill Christina in the same manner as Till and dump her corpse into Lake Michigan, but she revives. A suddenly more appreciative Ruby tells Letty of her relationship with William/Christina. Diana is attacked by Topsy and Bopsy and collapses. Lancaster attempts to enter Letty's house to find the orrery, but when he cannot, he and his policeman shoot up the house. A policeman tries to shoot Atticus, but a Shoggoth appears, who kills the policeman and tears off Lancaster's arm. Letty observes that Atticus's spell worked after all. So this is a massive episode. So much happens. We're going to have a lot to talk about. But starting with the Memorial of Emmett Till. When I was in high school, I took a multicultural studies class and learned about Emmitt Till for the first time. And I remember being shocked that I didn't know more about it. I remember being shocked that, and this is, at this time I was still pretty young and ignorant to a lot of this stuff. But just even hearing this story, right away, like how massive this is for a child to be killed in this way. And it's still happening today. This is horrific. example of it. But then, the story goes on that Emmett's mother left an open casket so everyone could see what happened and it's one of the most like heartbreaking things of all time. And to thread that into the story, similar to how Tulsa's threaded into the story, I think creates a lot of weight and impact.
Yeah, I remember there's some foreshadowing, right? When the kids are all around the Ouija board. I can't remember if it was episode 2 or 3. Probably episode 3. And Emmitt is one of the kids around the Ouija board. And I remember looking, I think he has a nickname or something, but I remember at the time being like, wait, why is this familiar? And doing a Google search or something and finding, oh shit, this is Emmitt Till, and he's a character in Lovecraft Country. And so
yeah, that totally like blew by me. I didn't realize that he was one of her friends until this episode.
Yeah, I think I even mentioned Emmitt Till in the episode where Ruby experiences what it's like to be white for the first time in the show, and I was like, oh, there's almost an Emmitt Till type moment with the police getting ready to attack this child, and I had no idea that we were going to come back and actually show the Emmitt Till story in this way, and I think this might be my favorite episode of the entire series. I think this is where like all the elements come together and work at their best. And also it's like, to me, it's also the most frightening episode. A child being pursued by these demons. And then we talked about in our last episode that Remy was on as a guest, we spoke about how in the book, it was his name's like, I think Horace in the book.
Horace,
a boy instead, but he's pursued by these images of these caricatures of blackness as perceived by white people. And we get the same kind of thing going on here, but something about putting it and bringing it to life on screen, it just works better for me. And it was scarier, in my opinion, and the way that these they followed Dee everywhere. I don't know. It really got me. And then the crescendo of ending the episode with this crazy shootout and the Shoggoth tearing into all these police. It was so awesome. It was a roller coaster of an episode, and it really worked.
Yeah, there's so much that happens in this episode. I feel like it's part of the crescendo, right, of the series, that there are all these threads that need to be pulled together. But I'm super glad that they had an episode that focused on, one, the experience of a young person, a child, and then two, that we got to have a whole episode devoted to Dee, to Diana, and I love her transformation over the course of the episode, where she becomes more determined. She tells out, like, she tears into the cops, right? Like has that verbal confrontation with them.
When she spit on him, Misha Green was saying that was improvised. So the spitting on him was improvised, and I was like, oh my god, what a moment.
So this is the so if I can flash forward just for a second, the image that we are left with, right, is Diana for the whole series. And it is a powerful one. Yeah. Our last few seconds of the series are with Diana. And this is the build-up. This is the where we see her unleashed, right, her transformed. When we see her wailing on the... was it Topsy and Bopsy in the garage. I feel the same sort of like the worst horror movies to me, besides ones with clowns and dolls, are ones with where children are in jeopardy, and then to see her. I almost didn't want Montrose to go in there at the end. I wanted to see her just take them out. Mm-hmm.
So you don't love it, I'm assuming, right? With the clowns and the children in danger.
I have not seen it because of that.
So I think you're touching on something though that I definitely have written down, is that Dee fights back, gets angry, and stands up to all these forces arrayed against her. and she still obviously succumbs to them in some way, and you know, she's going to lose her arm due to this. But I thought there was a message there about like the reaction to have is to get angry and to fight back. And it felt like that was directed at the audience of like, if you are in these situations of experiencing oppression, like don't just take it. Like, and I think that's a powerful message, right? It's not saying you're going to be immune to, you know, what could happen to you, but that is preferable to just being scared and not doing anything, I guess. I don't know. That was the message I was getting. Do you think that that's what was being said?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, you know, it's dangerous, and it can be dangerous to fight back. And so, like, putting your life in jeopardy is, like, you know, always a gamble, definitely. But I think the right thing to do is fight back, whether it's physical or you know, verbal or whatever it is, like, to stand up. But it's scary, man. It's like, you know, putting your life on the line isn't something that I feel like I have to do very often. So just, you know, it's a privilege thing. And it's like, in that situation.
Yeah, easy for us to say.
Yeah.
There's I've been thinking a lot about Diana and that last scene for the whole series in episode 10. But I'll hold on to that. Maybe we can come back to that. But I think this is really important. This whole choosing to fight back.
Love it. Yeah, let's save it for the very end. I did have one other thing for this episode I wanted to bring up though, because honestly, like, I don't think I quite understand what is happening, and I wanted to get both of your takes on it, because I assume I don't know if I'm missing something or what, but Christina in this episode chooses to die as Emmitt Till died, and the only thing I could think is that this is an attempt by Christina to experience something and to feel something, because we see Ruby sort of accuse her of like, you don't feel anything, do you? And she admits like, no, I don't. And then Christina, it's like she's trying to feel it and to like understand what happened. And it's one of those, it's an interesting moment for Christina as a character where I'm trying to figure out what is going on here. Like, is this Christina trying to understand the Black experience? Like, is that what's actually going on? Because if so, it doesn't seem to really go anywhere. Like, she doesn't seem changed by this moment as the series progresses. I don't know. What was your read on that, Remy?
I've thought a lot about Christina as kind of a stand-in for modern, I don't know if modern day is the right word for this, but the systemic racism that seems prevalent today. As opposed, we tend to think like, oh, that really overt personalized racism where people are throwing the N-bomb around and enacting, desiring to put violence directly on Black bodies, where today a lot of people claim not to be racist, right? And but still support systemic racism. I think of Christina Braithwaite as kind of a stand-in for the white audience in a lot of ways. And so I'm wondering if this is like, hey, I'm white, I'm trying to understand, I get it now, you know, like, is that what's going on there? She's also like a total sociopath, so like maybe not 100% related there, but
it was hard to watch, obviously, and knowing the context of what's happening and knowing the context of like, this is what happened to Emmitt Till. But I think you're hitting on it. I didn't know what to make of it really either. But I think that it's got to do something with just like a white person attempting to empathize, but like you said, Luke, it doesn't seem to have any implications going forward. She doesn't change by it. It doesn't seem like she learned anything by it. It doesn't seem like she really even like is scarred by it. So I don't really know what that means. And like, really, I guess it probably means that, you know, a white audience trying to go through something can't even still can't comprehend in certain ways because it's different. Like I'm not really sure. It's never going to be the same as actually being Black.
I had one thought. Maybe her vulnerability is a metaphor for white privilege. So even though she attempts to go through, she doesn't lose her life the way that Emmitt Till did. She's in full control of the situation, and she knows she's going to be okay at the end of it. And so maybe
Right.
maybe that's the connection there.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think you're touching on what it is. I think there is a moment we can see in episode 10, which I'll bring this back up, where maybe Christina does something she wouldn't have done otherwise. So maybe it does have some small effect. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like no matter how much you might be able to look at something like the story of Emmitt Till and understand what happened, there's a shield of whiteness that prevents you from experiencing it in the same way that black people do when they read about Emmitt Till, when they think about what happened to Emmitt Till. I think that is a lesson, right? Now, I think that there is still value in doing that. I think that as a white person myself, like putting myself in that situation and trying to empathize has been very beneficial to me in understanding these things. So I don't want to say that you can't do it and that there's not value to be had there. I just think it's good to be aware that there is a shield present for you that isn't there for other people. And I agree. I think Christina Braithwaite is someone who is maybe performing the action, but not actually learning the lesson. But I don't necessarily, I don't know, maybe Misha Green is saying this, but I don't co-sign the idea that like it is impossible to learn the lesson. I think you can. It's just you have to understand that there are certain barriers there.
Okay, so episode 9 is Rewind 1921. Hippolyta returns to Chicago to find Atticus, Letty, and Montrose struggling to keep Diana alive after her being cursed by Lancaster. Ruby summons Christina, who uses Hippolyta's blood to reset the curse, but warns that because Lancaster was the only one who knew the curse, it cannot fully be lifted. Christina visits and taunts a dying Lancaster and convinces Ruby to aid her in her quest for immortality, even after Ruby learns that the spell will kill Tick. The others decide to use Hiram's multiverse machine to travel back in time to 1921 Tulsa, where Tick's mother's family held the Book of Names before it was destroyed in the Tulsa Race Massacre. Upon arriving in 1921, Tick, Letty, and Montrose witness a young Montrose being beaten by his father. The adult Montrose flees. Tick goes looking for Montrose and finds him watching his younger self rebuke a friend of his for being a F-slur before the pair of them, as well as young George and Dora, are set upon by a white mob. Tick comes to the rescue. Letty is saved from attackers by Tick's mother's family, who hide her in their home, as it is attacked by another mob. And Letty convinces Tick's grandmother to hand over the Book of Names by promising to safeguard her family and their legacy. The trio flee the burning city and return to 1955 through the portal.
You know, I said the last one was my favorite, and I think it is. I think the last one is my favorite, but man, this is right there. This is my top 3, and as I referenced before, seeing Tulsa in a way that is probably even more in-depth than what we saw in Watchmen. Once again, something about the planes flying through the air and dropping firebombs just seems so unreal that if it wasn't true, I wouldn't believe it. But when I do the research on it, it's like, no, that really happened. It's what's so wild about it. And then, putting these characters in this moment where they're having to experience it, and it's all caught up in this time travel story. Just so good and so deeply personal to Montrose. That he really takes center stage here, and he's one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite from the book. And I think this is what really drove home the character in the show, where I was like, okay, they're really exploring Montrose in a way that I actually love. And this helped me to forgive some of the earlier missteps with the character, because this was just powerful stuff.
I've said it on almost every episode, but just having learned about Tulsa in 2019 because of Watchmen, and then now seeing it here in Lovecraft Country, and just seeing that these filmmakers and these storytellers can, bring awareness to something that until recently people weren't that familiar with, and just show how horrific it is. And similar to the book, this is very much like shoes on the ground. Like, you're there in the Tulsa Massacre, whereas I feel like we sort of got flashes from a child's perspective in Watchmen, and sort of a moment of it. But this is like deep in it, and the want to save people because of the time traveling element, which is always there in a time traveling story. But just like this is a true story. You know what I mean? Like this isn't like a fictionalized sort of time traveling story. This is a true tragedy that's happened where I don't know. It could. This is, if you were ever going to change history, this was going to be the time. And so like the want to change everything, and even like Montrose struggling with, wanting to save his friend that is eventually killed. I just can't even, that's the stuff that you would grapple with if in a time traveling story like this. So I'm glad they went there. And then all the stuff to do with the ancestors and actually getting to meet them and interact with them and see them as actual people and not thinking of them as like, oh, thankfully, grandma did this back in the day and that's helping me. But getting to see like the sacrifices that they made and ultimately the decision by Tick's grandmother to hand over the book and all of that was, I mean, it's like the sacrifices, the familial sacrifices, the things you give up for your family, especially in Black America, to keep them safe or to hopefully give them a better life than you had. And, we see it come full circle with the episode Full Circle, but the idea of familial love and the sacrifices that are there is pretty prevalent throughout the story.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what both of you said about how, I'm going to steal your word, James, profound it is to see the Tulsa Race Massacre, actually depicted and brought to life for us, right? I think I've been thinking about this, and I think about the different historical moments that we're taught in our U.S. history classes, and how it's possible that this may have been mentioned in a textbook as like a sentence, but not given any depth, not given any focus. And
do you know what massacre I know a lot more about? The Boston Massacre.
Yes, I just thought of that. Yeah,
it's like this idea of like, how much time do we spend talking about the Boston Massacre and the what came of that and all that, and then this idea that this happened in America, and I didn't even know. Not only did I not know it happened, I don't know the ramifications, what happened because of that or anything. And so it's just like,
unfortunately, probably not a lot.
Yeah.
Is part of the answer to that.
And how many people know
not
that
a lot of things changed, is what I'm saying.
The first casualty of the American Revolution in the Boston Massacre was a black man. I think a freedman. But I just wanted to say that here we are looking to HBO, looking to fucking HBO to teach us these deeply important historical moments. We're looking to a show based on a comic, right? We're looking to a show based, if you're talking about The Watchmen, which brought focus to the Tulsa Massacre, and then to a show that carries the name of this racist pulp hack writer in a lot of ways, who was living contemporary to this race massacre and was part of that culture. But we're looking to these shows to educate us. And I don't know what I think that says one thing. It's a sorry state of our education system, but it also speaks to the power of genre fiction to right those wrongs when we do get political, when we do bring in, when we choose not to ignore and whitewash history.
This is something we've been circling back around to throughout our entire coverage of this, just like how powerful art can be in righting those wrongs and educating, and the role that art plays in a society that needs to learn from its past ills, I think is really important. And so I'm glad to see it being brought to life in this way, but it is also kind of an indictment on our history classes.
I do want to talk about just the moment and like the bridging of families and the idea of like sticking together as a community, where Tick's grandmother basically passes the book on to Letty. And then Letty hasn't been in war, and from everything that we've seen, she hasn't lived the life that Montrose has had to live, sort of. And like, I'm not saying that I am saying she's lived an easier life potentially than those two in terms of like horrific things happening to them. But then again, I don't know fully. We don't have the full context of her whole life. But it's said early on how Montrose keeps saying like, you don't know what we're going into. You don't understand. You don't get it. And Atticus is like, basically like the implication is he's been through war, so he does get it. And he's like, but then we have Letty coming into the situation, and Letty is the one who's there with the family while their home is burned, while they all die trying to defend their family. And then we see how she's affected by that, and how family becomes so much more of an important of an element of her life after this. And just like the shot of her carrying that book down the streets as the fire bombs are just raining down, and like she's invulnerable to it, walking through it. It gives me goosebumps. It's just it's a great moment for the character, and I don't know. I thought that this it's profound. It's profound, guys.
You were talking a lot about CGI, I think, in the previous podcast episode for the show, for the first half of the show. And I just wanted to point out, Janae Smollett tweeted a picture of herself in the ER with her arm burnt, saying something like, Letty may be invulnerable, but not Janae Smollett. And so she was actually burned in the filming of that. So it's not all CGI.
Yeah.
But if I can, I'm probably going to go back and watch this. This particular episode was really deep and complicated for me, and partly because I grew up in an environment that was abusive, homophobic, and it was dripping with toxic masculinity. And so, in addition to the history around Tulsa, that was one part of this episode that deeply affected me and really connected me to Montrose in a deeper way. It's just him going through all this PTSD, right? As he re-experiences all the trauma of his youth. And you see how that's bred into him, or not bred into him, but it's deeply infused into him so that he is now carrying this forward into the next generation, basically, right? With Atticus.
Yeah.
And the generational pain being passed along, right? Like this is, the abuse he suffered at the hands of his father, and then he perpetrated it onto Atticus, and how that's all tied to masculinity. Absolutely, there's a lot going on there. So this is actually also a really important moment for Atticus, because I think this is the first time where, touching back on the moment we saw in the previous episode, where he doesn't understand what's going on with his father, and he's angry about it and accusatory. And then we see growth here as Atticus witnesses what the reality of his sexuality has been for him in his life and what he's experienced because of it. And then we see Atticus rise to the occasion, pick up the bat, and be the mystery man of his memories, right? And that, fun time travel way of like, oh, it was always this way. And it just, to me, is in a very important moment for Atticus and Montrose' relationship, and that he fully understands, or at least mostly understands what Montrose went through, and is able to accept him and his identity, and also what he has essentially given up to be his father. That's to me some of the most powerful stuff that takes place in that alleyway.
He still loved his son. You know what I mean? Like he was haunted by all the stuff that went on with his father, and then he felt society's pressure and everything to stay closeted as he had been, and then all of the pressure of being closeted in that way, and then still being like, but I was still your daddy, like no matter what, like I gave it all up to be your dad, basically, and like what that means to a person, and like, yeah, to see them kind of reconcile, and then in next episode there's some stuff that goes on with them that I'd like to talk about when we get there. But I do think this is a good time to go into the last episode. Last episode is called Full Circle. Tick recites the spell to open the book of names. Then he and Letty fall unconscious. Their subconscious/spirits are brought to an astral plane, and it's there that they learn the truth about magic from their ancestors. They are tasked with casting Hannah's spell, which will use Christina's spell against her to take magic from the Braithwaites. The ancestors help Tick and Letty heal Dee, then send them back to their bodies to enact their plan. Atticus, Letty, Hippolyta, and Gia weren't able to sabotage Christina. Her spell for immortality at Artem was successful, and it ended up killing Atticus in the process. Letty, who had been pushed from a tremendous height by Christina earlier, seemed as if she had succumbed to her fall, since Christina seemingly removed the mark of Cain from her earlier. But after the completion of Christina's ceremony, Letty's mark appears again, and she was alive and well. From there, Letty begins reading the spell that she was meant to cast in order to save everyone. With the help of Gia to bind Christina and Atticus closer to one another, using her tails, the spell was successfully cast by Letty. She had removed the magic not only from Christina, but all white people. The magic was with Letty and all black people now. Crushed by a falling structure, Christina was unable to move and was left alone as the family carried Atticus's body away. Dee appears, and it's revealed that she has a robotic arm. She and her Shoggoth come to find Christina, and instead of helping her, Dee chokes her until she dies.
We didn't even touch on the introduction of Lovecraft Country, the book, into the show, which my head was exploding when they bring it in. And it's supposed to be written by one of their ancestors, or I guess Atticus's son, right?
Atticus's son, George.
But when they talk about the book, they mention several big changes that are real. Christina is a man, Dee is a boy named Horace. Some of these major changes that are real and true to what actually was changed from the book. So I don't know. I love that it was this really interesting nod to it. But what a way to sort of claim the book and to take it and make it written by this character who is black, and take it away from Matt Ruff in a way that I think he would support, honestly.
Yeah,
I think
I'm sure he
did
loved
support,
it.
So
yeah,
it really does claim this story, in a meta way too, which I thought was pretty fun.
Yeah, and again, there's this moment where Letty and Tick are able to interact with their ancestors, and he has his moments with his mother that I think are really, heartwarming in ways, and just getting to see black people having this power and understanding it and saying like, all right, let's fucking go. Let's use this to finally end all of this basically taking out the system, right? The systemic racism and taking out the privilege out of the equation, hopefully, and evening the playing field. I just, again, the ancestral stuff I feel is really powerful.
The pacing of this episode was really interesting. And the first half or maybe even 2/3 of the episode was actually very slow for a climactic final episode. And so I thought a lot about that because when I trust a filmmaker and showrunner as much as I do Misha Green, I always think this is deliberate. What is she trying to do here? And I think it's, James, what you hit on is that all of that was just lovingly devoted to focus on family, focus on heritage and ancestry, and just those intergenerational connections, the connections that the matrilineal and maternal connections, going all the way back to Hannah, and the fatherly connections too, right, between Montrose and Atticus and Atticus's unborn son. You have this line going from Hannah all the way to Diana, and then you have this line going mainly from I think Montrose and George as the father figures down to Atticus's son. So that was something I was very, very aware of going into the rest of the episode.
You talked about sort of it's a little uneven, and I do think that this is an episode that, because they had to do some wrapping up, and because they wanted to try to do a lot, and I don't know, something about this episode wasn't quite what I was imagining, I guess, and like coming out of the episode, I felt like I liked the episode, but I think the previous 3 or 4 were like on a different level maybe, and endings are tough, and I get that, so that could probably have something to do with it as well. Although I don't know that the show's ended for good, I will say.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, like there could be a season 2. So before we get there, though, I wanted something I forgot to mention. I thought Gia was done really dirty by Atticus in the previous episode. When she comes all the way from Korea and is told off, and I was really glad to see Gia be able to be integrated, welcome to the family by Atticus, and have a role in this final chapter, because that episode 6 made her such an interesting character that it would have been a real disservice to just abandon her in that way. And I'm really glad that her story does come full circle. I think for the most part, I'm left with some questions about her, I guess, but I'm still satisfied enough to where that character was left.
You just made me think of something that I definitely wanted to touch on too, is the moment of joy that we get in the car where they're all singing together. And you know, Gia's in there, and like you said, it is one family. And really, something that stood out to me in that scene is the number of women that are important in this show. Because it had been happening, and it wasn't something that I was actively thinking of. That you know, it was very centered around women, and clearly it is. But getting to see them all in the car and being like, oh, I love that character, all of these characters. And I think there's only 2 men in the car, and the rest are all women. And I think that's kind of not the norm, I would say, in general.
And
especially
Christina's
in genre.
the main villain's even in the car.
Yeah,
that's true. That is the one thing I kept thinking about, is like, she is wearing Ruby here and participating in this. And what does that mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to emphasize what James was saying, is that, yeah, women are really important, and Ruby doubly represents both, you know, 2 women in the car.
It is odd to have, because that moment is different when you think about Christina performing it as Ruby rather than it actually being Ruby singing along. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird. I want to go back and watch it now with that knowledge, because I didn't know in the moment that the swap had happened. I didn't see that coming. That was a surprise.
Yeah, I was super bummed that Ruby dies, by the way. Like,
I wanted to ask you guys about that, because it felt almost like I wanted more to understand more about Ruby. Really, her final moment in the show as actual Ruby is this argument she has with Letty in the graveyard. And we get the forgiveness and the embrace, but that's Christina. So it's not really Ruby, and it's weird because it totally undercuts that moment of the sister bond. And I don't know, it makes Ruby really tragic, I guess, in that way, because it's like instead she was just duped, I guess, by Christina and killed.
I think that there's probably some ambiguity there, because it's possible that she's kind of not fully dead. When Gia does her magic, and you see her sifting through Atticus's and Christina's memories, there is a moment where Ruby is like in bed, like in a coma or something. So, she would have to be in order for Christina to make the potion, right? I think she can't be fully dead.
Yeah, I will say another grain of salt with basically everything that happens post episode 7, because it's a multiverse story at that point. So realistically, anyone can still be around. We could get an Atticus from another story. You know what I mean? It could get crazy if they wanted to bring people back. There's ways.
Sure. But I was specifically mentioning how in the book, the character who is being preserved for the potions is said to be in sort of a near-death coma, whereas in the show, Christina says they're dead. So if we take Christina's word, then Ruby, it has to be dead for this potion to work. Although I think there is some ambiguity there of whether or not that maybe Christina was lying when she said that. It's possible. I did want to mention, okay, so we had touched on a few things in previous episodes that we wanted to circle back on, so let's start doing that here. There was a moment where Christina threw Letty off of the tower, and Letty appears to die, but then we find out that she is okay. In the flashes, it seems like maybe Christina chose to restore the mark, to bring Letty back. And that was my I alluded to earlier, maybe that is Christina having connected somewhat with the Black experience to the Emmitt Till stuff. Otherwise, I don't know why she would do that. And also her relationship to Ruby, right? 'Cause she had promised not to harm her. And that relationship, I think, is metaphor essentially for her relationship to Black people. And even though she abuses it, there's something there, right, where she does that. And that was my one thing I could say. Maybe in Christina, it was changed in some small way. That would be it.
Yeah, at the very least, she was doing it to keep her promise to Ruby that she wouldn't hurt Letty or something. You know, at the very least, that's what happened.
That's my take on that. That's my best way to explain that, because I was sure that Letty was dead. I mean, like in that moment, I don't know if I knew that she was going to come back in some way. I didn't know how, but considering that Christina's last words to her before knocking her over was the promise. I made this promise to Ruby. That makes sense that she would maybe restore the invulnerability mark. I'm not sure how I feel about that as a piece of filmmaking. Like, I feel like they wanted to get the full emotional impact of, oh no, Letty's dead, from the audience. So I have mixed feelings about that, the execution of it, so to speak.
Do you guys want to talk about D at the end?
Yeah. That scene. So I'm thinking that Misha Green and the creators of Lovecraft Country want to leave us with a punchline, right? That I feel like that last scene is very important. It's weighty. And there are all of these characters who had every reason to dispatch Christina, you know, our big bad for the season 1. And they chose to run with Diana. And so that really intrigues me. And I'm wondering I guess that's one question I have for you all is, what kind of message do you think Lovecraft Country's creators want to leave with us? And I have some thoughts on that. But that last scene where Diana has just brutally and intimately killed Christina. She doesn't just choke her. She like pops her neck or
explodes
something.
her.
Yeah, it's like,
Pops her neck out.
And then she backs up, and the Shoggoth comes up behind. It's the black Shoggoth that took out the white Shoggoth earlier, right? And then it rears its head back and is howling at the full moon. Like, it is just chilling.
So that's going to be iconic for sure. Yeah. To me, it just represents that is D snuffing out white supremacy. Like, that's what it represented to me. That's her choking out and ending this world's version of white supremacy. And that's what I walk away with. And the idea that, you know, Black people have the magic going forward and white people are barred from it. That's just all of what it represents to me, is like that it's all been taken back now and it's over. And that's where I think I land on it.
And she embodies genre, right? Like, she's got the robotic arm, she's got the monster working for her. And then I think it's also really important that she is in this new generation. It's being passed along, and it's about young people now who are alive today and reclaiming and participating in genre and being unapologetic about it. And D is sort of a symbol of power, I think, in this moment. And I think a perfect way to end the series.
The other thing, just to call back to when you were talking about the only way to combat white supremacy is to fight it, right? Is to choose to fight it. I think, James, that might have been something that you mentioned a little bit earlier in this episode. And I think that's what we're seeing here, is of all the ways she could have shown mercy to Christina, but no, she chose to, as James was saying, to snuff out white supremacy. So it is, the focus is on the next generation, and the focus is on fighting to the end of white supremacy.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely, man. I think that's a perfect way to end the series. And now that we've arrived at the end, we're going to take a vote on what was better, the book or the show. This is something we've been doing this year for the first time. I think this is your first time participating in it with us, Remy. So let's go around. I'm going to save your vote for last. James, do you want to start?
You know, this was tough because I think I like both of these near equally. but there's a couple of things that have the show edge out the book for me. And it really just is, some of it comes down to that meta level that we've talked about so much, is what this show represents, especially right now in America. What they were able to achieve, the way that they swung for the fences, the reclaiming of genre for Black characters in this way. The entire cast was amazing. Some of the, like I said, there's like 3 or 4 episodes in here that'll stick with me forever. And I'm going to take the show because I think that it's in a way more important right now. And I think that it's also, it's really refreshing. And to use my word one more time, I found it to be extremely profound.
So I went into this show thinking it was going to be a landslide for the show. I honestly didn't think it'd be close, but it ended up being closer than I thought. There were a few things that I think stylistically for me it wasn't what I was expecting, and I had to force myself to come around. I have an interesting sort of perspective on, I don't know, interesting, but I have my own personal feelings about like how to deal with the supernatural, and this show went really against what I normally think of, like less is more sometimes. It went for more is more. And all of those things come together with a couple of the missed moments we talked about, Mantras in particular, the murder of Yahima, and some of these things. There's a little bit of unevenness throughout the series, and in some ways it does feel like overloaded with so much content and so much happens that it maybe suffers a little bit at times. All that being said, though, it is still the show for all the reasons you just said. So important. I love to see it reclaimed in this way. And I would have I'm excited for the possibility of a second season for the first time. It's like, take it away. Go somewhere that the books never go and do something fully in Misha Green's control, because we see some of this stuff that she added to the show is, fantastic. So anyway, I'm rambling. It's the show for me. How about you, Remy?
It's funny. At different moments, I think I thought maybe they were close, but now that you've put me on the spot and made me really think about the impact of both, if I can rewind just a little bit, when I first picked up Lovecraft Country, the book, which was a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I remember being really excited at what Matt Ruff was doing, right, for even as a white guy, for bringing, for subverting these Lovecraftian tropes, racist tropes, and I also loved the literary love of the main characters. Just when Montrose, who is continually dissing pulp literature and its racism, he and George and Atticus, when they're going back and forth and talking about science fiction, I love that. But I think that Lovecraft Country, the book, helped open the door for Lovecraft Country, the series. And I think that this is where it rightfully belongs. Lovecraft Country is largely about the horrors of the Black experience in America and reclaiming and subverting genre for Blacks and other POCs. And I feel like its true ownership is with Black creators. So I'm really glad that it's made that shift. And I think Matt Ruff is also really glad of that too. I think it's way more ambitious than the book. And it's the sort of ambitious storytelling and filmmaking that even where it fails, it's failed because it's taking these risks, and it succeeds better than really solid, safe filmmaking, if that makes any sense at all. So I think that's what I wanted to give it kudos for, being so ambitious and not shying away from that. And I think it's going to open the doors for all kinds of other work to be done, including hopefully future seasons of Lovecraft Country. And then the one other thing that I wanted to add was, it's not just about race, it's not just about pulp. Some of the family storytelling in this, the redemption of Montrose, to me, is where I'm not a crying type, but I came pretty dang close when Atticus, the letter to Montrose, is read. And he's basically that's a trope that's been subverted by this show, right? Is usually it's the young person who is saved by the older person, but here you have the young person, the son, helping to redeem and save the father, and Montrose deserves that second chance. So anyhow, definite thumbs up for the show.
Yeah, it sounds like we're unanimous for the show. We didn't mention how different this is than the book, but it is quite different. The tone of this ending, and Atticus survives the events of the book. So it really has been taken and changed in a dramatic way, and I think for the better, because like you said, this story is in its rightful place, I think, in the hands it's in now, and where it deserves to be. So I think that's a good place to leave Lovecraft Country. What a journey it's been. Thank you so much for joining us, Remy, for these last 2 episodes. I highly recommend at least go back 1 episode and listen to Remy talk about Lovecraft Country, the novel, which he does have a lot of love for. Where can people find you online? I know I asked you last time, but just in case, where can people find you? And if you were, you got a new thing coming out, where would they find it?
I would say go to Remy Mura. That's REMYMURA. Either on Twitter or on Instagram. You can find me there. I'd be happy to talk to you all about these things. And thank you so much for having me. This has been, it is fun to experience the shows, but it is so much fun to just nerd out about them like ad nauseum, like at length afterwards. Like when you experience great film, literature, you just want to keep replaying it over and over again, right? And talking and pursuing every possible line. So thank you. Yeah,
you're touching on the secret of the show that James and I just wanted to do this, so we invented a show to give us an excuse.
No, it's
and
awesome.
You're welcome on any time, man. Just let me know whenever you want to come back, because we love having you on. I said it last time, but I think you're a great sort of calming presence on a show where I can kind of go off the rails a little bit. I think it's perfect.
Oh, I feel super honored.
So yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Oh, and I just wanted to encourage your listeners, like, if they're picking this one up for the first time, if there's any show or any book that they just want to kind of cogitate on and they can't find anybody else to talk to about it, go find the Ink to Film episode for it. And if there isn't one, go bug Luke and James to see if they'll make one for you.
Thanks for saying that. I really appreciate it, man. All right, that's going to be it for Lovecraft Country. See you later, Remy.
All right, yeah, thanks again, you guys.
Thanks again to Remy for coming on the podcast. Always a pleasure to have him. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating or review on whatever platform you're using, iTunes, Google Play. If you see us on YouTube, any of that stuff, leave a comment, subscribe, and leave a review if possible.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, it helps get the word out there and spread the show.
And if you'd like to connect with us on social media, we are at Ink to Film on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Definitely do that. We'd love to have you follow us.
If you want to support us another way, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/Ink2Film. We have many different tiers, but our $2 tier gets you our monthly bonus episodes. We have like close to 30 now, I think, like 28 or 29. So, we talk about all kinds of different stuff, a lot of adaptation adjacent stuff, but also like we've talked about the, upcoming adaptations in the news, all kinds of stuff. Go check those out if you're interested.
And we want to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. All right, here we are at the end. I'm excited because we get to announce our very next project. We are going to be going into V for Vendetta, our second Alan Moore entry, although it is the older version, or it predates Watchmen as far as I know. And then watching the film, it's going to be it's another political one.
It'll be an experience, and it's going to be right before the election. And again, we want to say get out there and vote for Joe Biden during the election. Yeah. Get out there and vote.
Join me, man. It felt great. It really feels good to do. I highly recommend.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this week. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.